2. Sunday, December the 24th, 1950. Alice went out to do some shopping, but all the shops in her neighbourhood were closed, so she took the bus to a local market. She stopped at a grocer's stall and decided she would buy the makings of a holiday meal. She chose a fresh egg and forgot about her resolution to save money at the sight of 2 strips of bacon. A baker's stall just a little farther down the road was full of small but delicious-smelling cakes, so she treated herself to a fruit cake and a little pot of honey. That evening she would have dinner in bed with a good book. A sound night's sleep, and she knew she would feel ready to work again. Alice tended to feel gloomy when she hadn't got enough sleep, and she'd been spending too much time at her work table over the past few weeks. A bouquet of old-fashioned roses in the window of a florist's shop caught her eye. It wasn't very thrifty of her, but it was Christmas. Besides, she could let them dry and use the petals for her fragrances. She went into the shop, spent 2 shillings, and left with the flowers in the crook of her arm and her heart singing. Farther down the street, she came to a perfume shop. A closed sign hung in the window, but when she approached to peer through the glass, she could see one of her creations on a shelf among the lines of bottles. She waved, as though waving to a friend, and headed back to the bus stop. Back at home, she put away her shopping, put the roses in a vase, and decided to go for a walk in the park. On her way out, she ran into Mr. Daldry on the street. He also seemed to be just coming home from the market. "Christmas time," he said, visibly embarrassed to be seen holding such a well-filled shopping basket. "Christmas time indeed," said Alice. "Do you have guests this evening?" "God, no, I hate that sort of thing," he whispered, aware it was blasphemous to admit as much. "You too? Don't even get me started on New Year's Eve. It's even worse. How can you decide ahead of time whether or not it's going to be a day worth celebrating? Who knows until they get up that morning whether they'll even be in the mood to have a party? I think it's phony to force oneself to be jolly just because it happens to be marked on the calendar." "I suppose celebrations are nice for children, though." "I don't have any. All the more reason to give up playtime. And that whole business of making them believe in Father Christmas. Say what you like, but I think it's rather nasty. One day you'll have to tell them the truth, so what's the use? It's so cruel. The slow ones wait for him for weeks, thinking he's on the way, only to feel betrayed when their parents confess the rotten truth. The smart ones have to hold their tongues and play along, which is just as bad. Is your family coming, then?" "No." She paused. "I don't really have one." "A good reason not to invite them over." Alice laughed at this, but Daldry still blushed violent purple. "I'm sorry, that was horribly clumsy of me, wasn't it?" "No, a very sensible observation." "I do have one. A family, I mean. A father, a mother, a brother, a sister, and a dreadful nephew." "And you're not spending Christmas with them?" "No, I haven't for years. We don't get along." "Another good reason to stay home." "I've tried for years, but every family celebration has always been a disaster. My father and I agree on nothing. He thinks it's ridiculous that I'm a painter, and I think his business is ghastly dull. We can't stand each other. Have you had breakfast?" "How did we go from your father to breakfast?" "I'm not sure." "Well, since you asked, no, I haven't. The cafe on the corner serves a winning porridge. If you'll just give me a minute to put this decidedly feminine but very useful shopping basket in my flat, I'll take you there." "I was just about to go for a walk in Regent's Park." "On an empty stomach in this cold? Very bad idea. Let's go eat, and then we'll feed the ducks. The nice thing about ducks is that you don't have to dress up like Father Christmas to make them happy." Alice smiled and acquiesced. "All right, take your things upstairs, and then we'll go and have some of your porridge and give the ducks Christmas dinner." "Marvellous," said Daldry, already on his way up the stairs. "I'll just be a minute." A few moments later he reappeared, winded from having hurried and doing his best to hide it. At the cafe, they took a table next to the window, looking out on the street. Daldry ordered a tea for Alice and a coffee for himself. The waitress brought them 2 bowls of porridge, and Daldry asked for some bread. Instead of eating it, he slipped it into his pocket when the waitress wasn't looking, much to Alice's amusement. "What kind of landscapes do you paint?" "Oh, I only paint utterly useless things. I know some people go crazy over the countryside, or the sea, or the forest, but I just paint intersections." Intersections? Yes, street intersections, junctions. You can't beat the amount of life and activity at a junction. There are thousands of details. Some people are in a hurry, others are trying to find their way. There are all sorts of modes of transportation and so much movement. Buses, automobiles, motorcycles, bicycles, people on foot, deliverymen with their carts. Men and women from all walks of life cross paths, bother each other, meet each other, ignore each other, run into each other, get into arguments with each other. An intersection is a fascinating place. "What a curious idea," said Alice, trying to imagine what one of his paintings must look like. "Perhaps, but you have to admit, it beats a plate of fruit. What could possibly happen, apart from some mould? Yesterday, for example, I set up my easel in Trafalgar Square. It was difficult to find a vantage point where I wasn't constantly being jostled, but I've got a knack for finding the right spot. There was a woman, panicked at being caught in a sudden rain shower, and who was probably trying to find shelter for her hair, which had just been done. She started across the street without looking, and the driver of a dray had to swerve to avoid her. It gave her a terrible fright, but she was fine. The kegs of beer on the back of the cart, however, rolled off into the street. A bus coming from the other direction hit one of them, and it exploded upon impact. It was a scene straight out of A Tale of Two Cities, complete with a couple of old vagrants ready to lie on the ground and lap up the damages. Of course, there was an altercation between the driver of the dray and the bus conductor, not to mention the passers-by who got mixed up in it. And in spite of the fact the police were in attendance, a pickpocket still managed to steal what looked like a day's earnings off the rubbernecks. Meanwhile, the woman whose distraction caused the whole disaster just crept away in shame. "And you painted all that?" "No. For the time being, I've just painted the intersection. I've got a lot of work ahead of me. But I can still see the entire scene. That's the important part. I don't think I've ever noticed so much. I've always had a fascination with detail, for the little, almost invisible events that are always happening around us. Don't turn now. But at the table behind you, there's an old woman. I want you to get up and take my seat as though it were normal." Alice traded seats with Daldry. "Now," he said, "look at her carefully and tell me what you see." "A woman of a certain age, eating alone. She's rather well dressed and she's wearing a hat." "Be more observant. What else?" "Nothing in particular. She's wiping her mouth with the napkin." "Why don't you just tell me what I'm not seeing? She's going to think I'm staring." "Well, she's wearing makeup, isn't she? Not much, but her cheeks are powdered. There's a bit of kohl around her eyes, and she's wearing lipstick." "Yes. Well, I think so anyway." "Look at her lips now. Are they still?" "No, you're right," said Alice, surprised at Daldry's powers. "They're moving ever so slightly. Maybe it's a tic? Old age?" "Not in the least. That woman is a widow. She's speaking to her dead husband. She's not eating alone. She's continuing to talk to him, as though he was still sitting across from her. She's made up her face because he's still part of her life. Isn't it incredibly touching? Imagine the kind of strength it takes to constantly reinvent the presence of a loved one. And she's right to do so. Just because somebody is gone doesn't mean they don't exist anymore. With a little imagination, you're never alone. When it's time to pay, she'll push her money over to the other side of the table, because it was always her husband who paid. When she gets up to leave, you'll see that she waits a few moments on the pavement before crossing, because her husband was always the first to step out into the street. I'm sure that she talks to him every night before she goes to bed, and every morning when she wakes up, no matter where he might be now." "And you saw all that in just a few minutes?" Daldry smiled knowingly, and as he did so, An old drunk staggered into the cafe. He went over to the woman and made a sign that it was time to go. She paid her bill and followed her husband out of the door, no doubt to Wimbledon for the greyhound racing. Daldry, his back to the scene, saw nothing. "You're right," said Alice. "She did exactly what you said she would. She pushed the money across the table, got up and left. An invisible man for holding the door for her as she went out." Daldry beamed with satisfaction and continued to eat with relish. "Great stuff, isn't it? The porridge, I mean." "Do you believe in fortune-tellers?" "I beg your pardon?" "Do you believe that it's possible to predict the future?" "That's a complicated question," he said, signalling to the waitress for a second serving. "Imagine how boring that would be if the future was already written. What about our own free will? I think that fortune-tellers are just extremely intuitive people, but apart from the real charlatans, the sincere ones have a certain talent. Maybe they just manage to see what people are aspiring to, the things that they will try to do one day, sooner or later. Why not? Take my father, for example. He's got perfect eyesight, but sees nothing. My mother, on the other hand, has terrible vision, yet she sees things that my father would be incapable of noticing. She knew ever since I was a child that I would become a painter. But she also imagined that my paintings would be hanging in the greatest museums, and I haven't sold a thing in 5 years, so what can I say? I'm a sorry excuse for an artist. But I'm just going on about myself without really answering your question. What makes you ask?" "Something strange happened to me yesterday, the sort of thing I would never have paid any attention to before. Yet, ever since, I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, to the point that I'm beginning to feel obsessed." "That's rather vague. Why don't you tell me what happened yesterday, and I'll tell you what I think." Alice leaned in and told Daldry about her day in Brighton and her encounter with the fortune-teller. Daldry listened without interrupting. Once she reached the end of the fortune-teller's strange predictions, Daldry turned to ask the waitress for the bill. He suggested they go outside and get some fresh air. As they walked back to the house, he asked with false consternation, "So, if I understand you correctly, you have to meet 6 other people before you will meet this important man?" Alice corrected him. "The man who will matter most in my life." "Nearly the same thing, I suppose. And you didn't ask any questions about who that man might be, or where he might be found?" "No, she just told me that he had walked behind me while we were talking." "And she spoke of a journey?" "Yes, I think so, but it's all so absurd. I'm terribly silly for telling you such a ridiculous story." "A ridiculous story, as you call it, which seems to have kept you awake for a good part of the night." "Do I look that tired?" Your pacing made the floor creak. "I'm sorry if I bothered you." "Well, I can only think of one solution for us to get a normal night's sleep. I'm afraid the duck's Christmas will have to wait until tomorrow." "What are you talking about?" asked Alice as they reached the house. "Go upstairs and put on something warmer, and I'll meet you back here in a few minutes." "What an odd day," Alice said to herself on her way up the stairs. Christmas Eve wasn't at all panning out as she had imagined. First, breakfast with her crabby neighbour, a man she could barely stand, but who now didn't seem so bad, and then her unexpected confidences. Why had she gone on for so long about something she herself found absurd and insignificant? She opened her wardrobe and had a terrible time finding a jumper and a scarf that went together. She hesitated between a navy blue cardigan that showed off her figure and a heavier wool coat. She looked in the mirror, fixed her hair, and decided to forego makeup. She was, after all, just going on this walk out of courtesy. When she returned to the street in front of the house, Daldry was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps he had changed his mind. He was an odd man. A car honked its horn, and she turned to see a midnight blue Austin 10 pull up to the curb. Daldry got out to open the passenger door for Alice. "You have a car?" she asked, surprised. "I stole it." Alice's eyes grew wide. "Of course I have a car. Do you take me for a thief?" Well, excuse my astonishment, but you are now officially the only person I know who owns a car. I bought it used. It's no rolls, as you'll note once you've experienced the suspension, but it gets me from point A to point B quite effectively. I always put her somewhere in my intersections. It's a sort of ritual. She's in all of my paintings. You'll have to show me your paintings one of these days, Alice said, getting in. Daldry muttered something unintelligible under his breath as he closed the door. He got in the driver's side, and with the gears making a grinding sound, the car lurched into motion. I don't mean to pry, but might I know where we're going? To Brighton, of course. Brighton? What on earth for? To go visit that fortune-teller and ask her a few of the questions you ought to have asked her yesterday. But that's crazy. We'll be there in an hour and a half, 2 hours if there's ice on the roads. I don't see anything crazy about it. We'll be home by dusk, and if by any chance we get held up, the chrome things you see on either side of the bonnet are headlights. Nothing perilous is lying in wait for us. This is all very generous of you, Mr. Daldry, but would you be so kind as to stop poking fun at me? I promise to make an effort, Miss Pendelbury, but please don't expect the impossible. They left London by way of Lambeth and drove to Croydon, where Daldry asked Alice to take the road map out of the glove box and find Brighton Road, somewhere to the south. Alice told him to turn right, before telling him to turn around, because she had been holding the map upside down. After a few more wrong turns, a passer-by put them on the correct route. At Redhill, Daldry stopped to fill the tank and check the tyre pressure. Alice preferred to stay in the relative warmth of the car, with the map open on her lap. After Crawley, Daldry had to drive more slowly. The countryside was white with snow, and the windscreen began to fog up. A few times the Austins skidded on sharp turns in the road. An hour later, they were so cold that it became impossible to keep up a conversation. Daldry had turned the heat up as far as it would go, but the little heater was powerless against the icy wind that blew under the bonnet and into the car. They stopped at an inn called the 8 Bells and warmed themselves up at a table near the fireplace. After one last cup of boiling hot tea, they set off again. Nearly 4 hours after they had left London, Daldry announced that Brighton wasn't much farther. When they finally got there, the carnival was already beginning to close for the evening, and the long pier was nearly deserted. The last few merrymakers were heading home to celebrate Christmas. "All right, then," said Daldry, as he got out of the car. "Where is this fortune-teller I've heard so much about?" "I doubt she waited for us," said Alice, blowing on her hands and stamping her feet in an attempt to warm up. "Don't be pessimistic. Come along." They went to the pier ticket window. It was closed. "Perfect," he said. "Free entrance." When they saw the caravan, Alice was overcome by a wave of anxiety. She hesitated. Daldry could sense her unease. "That fortune-teller is just a human being, a woman like you and me. Well, like you, I should say. There's no reason for you to be worried. We're going to do what it takes to break the spell." "You're poking fun again." "I was just trying to make you smile. Why don't you go and hear what the old bat has to say, and we'll laugh about it on the way home. By the time we're back in London, you'll be so tired you'll sleep like a baby no matter what she says. Go on, be brave. I'll wait for you here. I won't move an inch." "Thank you, and I'm sorry for acting like a child." "Yes, well, get on with it. It would be better if we didn't have to drive home in the pitch black. I should have mentioned that only one headlight is properly functioning." Alice approached the caravan. Its shutters were pulled tight, but a light was on inside. She knocked on the door. The fortune-teller seemed astonished to see her again. "What are you doing here? Is something wrong?" Alice shook her head. "You don't look well. You're pale," continued the old woman. I'm a bit cold." "Well, come in and warm yourself by the stove," she said. Alice stepped into the little room and noticed the now familiar vanilla-note perfume. It was stronger near the stove. She sat on a little bench, and the fortune-teller came and sat at her side, taking Alice's hands in hers. "So you came back to see me?" "I happened to be passing by, and I saw the light." Well, welcome back. Who are you? Asked Alice. Oh, just a fortune-teller, but the locals have respect for me. You know, some people even come a long way for me to tell them about their future. But yesterday I could see in your eyes that you thought I was nothing but a crazy old woman. I suppose if you're back, it's because you've changed your mind. What do you want to know? The man who walked behind me while we were talking yesterday, why do I have to meet 6 other people before I'll meet him again? I'm sorry, my darling, but I don't have answers to everything. I just told you what came to me. I can't just make things up. I never do. I don't like lies. Neither do I, said Alice. But you didn't just happen to be passing by my caravan just now, did you? Alice admitted as much with a shake of her head. Yesterday you knew my name. I never told you my name, Alice said. And you? How are you able to name the ingredients of a perfume? I don't know. It's a gift. I'm a nose, and I'm a fortune-teller. We're both talented women in our own domains. I came back because somebody pushed me to do so. It's true that what you said yesterday has been bothering me. I didn't sleep a wink last night because of it. I understand. I might have felt the same in your position. Tell me the truth. Did you really see all of the things you told me yesterday? The truth? God help us. The truth isn't engraved in stone, you know. Your future depends on your choices, on your will. It belongs to you. So, your predictions are just stories. They're possibilities, not certainties. You decide. Decide what? Everything. Whether or not to ask me to reveal what I see. But knowledge has its consequences. Well, first of all, I'd like to know if you're sincere. Did I ask to be paid yesterday or today? You're the one who came back, but you seem so worried, so tormented, that it's probably better if we leave it there. Go home, Alice. If it reassures you, know that nothing grave menaces your future. Alice studied the fortune-teller in silence. She wasn't intimidated anymore. To the contrary, her company had become agreeable, her gravelly voice soothing. Alice hadn't come all this way to leave without knowing something more, and the idea of defying the old woman didn't appeal to her. She straightened her back and held out her hands. You're right. Tell me what you see. It's up to me to decide what I want to believe or not. Are you certain? Every Sunday, my mother dragged me to Mass. In the winter, it was dreadfully cold in the church. I spent hours on end praying to a God that I never knew and who never spared any of us. So I think I can spend a few minutes listening to what you have to say. I'm sorry your parents didn't make it through the war. How did you know that? Hush now. You came here to listen, and all you've done is talk. She turned Alice's palms upward. You have 2 lives in you, Alice. The one you know, and another one. One that has been waiting for you for a very long time. They have nothing in common apart from you. The man I spoke about yesterday is to be found somewhere along the path to that other, unknown life, but he will be forever lost to you unless you go on a long journey, a journey that will lead you to discover that nothing you believe in is real. But that doesn't make any sense, Alice protested. Perhaps. After all, I'm just a fortune-teller at a carnival. A journey where? To the place you come from, my darling. To your past. Well, I just came from London, and I intend to return there this evening. I'm talking about the land you were born in, which is also London. I was born in Holborn. No, you weren't, said the fortune-teller with a smile. I know where my mother gave birth to me, for heaven's sake. You weren't born in England. You come from farther afield. There is no need to be a fortune teller to see that. Your features betray your true origins. I'm sorry to tell you, but my ancestors are from the Midlands and the North, Birmingham on my mother's side, and Yorkshire on my father's side. No, both of them were from farther east, whispered the woman. They came from an empire that no longer exists, from a very old country, a land thousands of miles from here. The blood that flows in your veins has its source between the Black Sea and the Caspian. Look in the mirror and see for yourself. You're just making things up. I don't mean to repeat myself, Alice, but if you're going to undertake this journey, there are certain things you are going to have to accept. From the way you're reacting, I'd say you're still not ready. Let's leave it at that for now. Oh, no, you don't. I'm not going to spend another sleepless night. I'm not going back to London until I'm sure that you're a charlatan. The fortune-teller's face dropped. Pardon me. I'm sorry. That's not really what I think. I don't mean to be disrespectful. The old woman let go of Alice's hands and rose to her feet. Go home and forget everything I've told you. I'm the one who should be sorry. The truth is that I'm nothing but a rambling old hag who amuses herself at the price of others' dignity. I tried so hard to predict your future that I got caught up in my own tricks. Go on and live your life free from worry. You're a beautiful woman. There's no need to be a fortune teller to see that you'll meet a man to your liking, no matter what happens. She went to open the door, but Alice stayed put. You were more believable before. Let's play the game. After all, nothing is preventing us from thinking of this as a game. Suppose I were to take your predictions seriously. Where would I begin? You're starting to wear me out, my darling. Like I said, I never predicted anything. I just say whatever happens to come into my head, so there's no use in you wasting your time. Don't you have anything better to do on Christmas Eve? You don't have to debase yourself. I promise I'll leave when you answer my question. The fortune-teller looked at a time-worn little Byzantine icon hanging above the door of her small caravan and fondly touched the saint's face before turning back to Alice. You'll meet somebody to guide you to the next step in Istanbul. But remember, if you follow the trail to its end, the world you live in today won't remain. Now leave me. I'm exhausted. She opened the door, and the cold winter air swept into the room. Alice pulled her coat around her and reached for her purse, but again the fortune-teller refused her money. Alice wound her scarf around her neck and said goodbye. The pier was deserted, and the lights that hung along the length of the dock swung in the wind, emitting a strange, clinking melody. The Austin's single headlight blinked at her from the street. Daldry had taken refuge from the cold inside his car. I was starting to worry. I thought perhaps I should come and get you, but it's so blasted cold out there. I'm afraid we're going to have to drive in the dark, said Alice. You were in there for a while, he said, as he started the engine. It didn't feel like very long. Well, it did to me. I hope it was worth it. Alice picked up the road map and unfolded it across her lap. Daldry put his foot on the accelerator, and the back end of the car skidded a bit on the ice. Funny way to spend Christmas Eve, said Alice, in guise of an apology. A lot better than sitting bored to death next to the radio at home. If the roads aren't too icy, we'll have time for dinner when we get back. Midnight's still a long way off. So is London, I'm afraid, said Alice with a sigh. How much longer are you going to keep me in suspense? Did she tell you the rest of the story? Are you going to be able to sleep through the night? Not exactly. Daldry opened his window a crack. Mind if I smoke? Not if you offer me one. You smoke? No, admitted Alice. But tonight, why not? Daldry took a pack of embassies from his coat pocket. "Hold the wheel," he told Alice. "You know how to drive?" "No more than I know how to smoke," she said, leaning over to grip the wheel while Daldry slipped 2 cigarettes between his lips. "Well, try to keep us on the road." He lit both cigarettes and corrected Alice's steering with his free hand before passing her one. "So we came all this way for nothing. You seem worse than you did this morning." "I think I put too much faith in that woman's predictions. I'm just tired, I suppose. She was even crazier than I remembered." The first drag on her cigarette sent Alice into a coughing fit. Daldry plucked it from her fingers and threw it out of the window. "Go on then, sleep. I'll wake you up when we get there." Alice leaned back and felt her eyelids grow heavy. Daldry watched her for a moment before turning his concentration back to the road. Daldry pulled up in front of the house and turned off the engine. He wondered how he ought to wake Alice. If he said something, she would jump, but putting his hand on her shoulder would be unseemly. He could clear his throat, but would she even notice? She had slept all the way home, in spite of the roaring motor and squeaky suspension. "We're going to freeze to death if we spend the night out here," Alice whispered, opening an eye. When they were upstairs, Daldry and Alice stood a moment in the hallway, not knowing what to say next. Alice took the lead. "It's only 11 o'clock. "You're right," said Daldry. "Just a little past 11. "What did you get at the market this morning?" asked Alice. "Oh, some ham, some piccalilli, red beans, and a piece of Cheshire." "Well, I have an egg, bacon, fruit cake, and honey." "A regular feast. I'm dying of hunger," said Daldry. "Let me invite you to dinner. You took me out to breakfast, and I must have cost you a fortune in petrol. I haven't even thanked you." "With pleasure. I'm free every night this week." "I meant tonight, Ethan." "I'm also free tonight." I had my doubts. It would be silly for each of us to celebrate Christmas alone on either side of a wall. "I'll make us an omelette." "Wonderful. I'll just hang up my coat and be right over." Alice lit the gas ring and melted some butter in a frying pan. While she waited for it to heat up, she pushed her trunk into the middle of the room, covered it with a tablecloth, and set 2 places, putting 2 large cushions on the floor on either side. Daldry knocked and came into the room, wearing a flannel suit and holding his shopping basket. "I thought I'd bring along a little something I bought at the market this morning. It will be perfect with dinner." He revealed a bottle of wine, which he immediately opened with the corkscrew he took from his pocket. "It's Christmas, after all. We can't just drink water." Over the course of dinner, Daldry told Alice stories from his childhood. He talked about the difficult relationship he had with his family, evoking the hardship his mother endured from having married a wealthy man who shared neither her tastes nor her vision of the world, let alone her delicate wit. He talked about his dull but ambitious brother, who had done all he could to drive Daldry away from his parents, in hopes of becoming the sole inheritor of their father's business. Daldry continually asked Alice if he was boring her, but she reassured him that, to the contrary, she found his family portrait sad, but fascinating. "And you?" he finally asked. "What was your childhood like?" "Oh, very happy, really. I was an only child. I always wanted a brother or sister, but in the end, I suppose I benefited from having my parents' full attention." "What did your father do?" "He was a pharmacist. He used to experiment with medicinal plants in his free time. He ordered seeds and cuttings from all over the world. My mother helped him in the shop. They met at university. We didn't live in the lap of luxury, but we were comfortable. My parents loved each other. It was a happy home." "You were lucky." "Yes, I realise that. But at the same time, maybe growing up surrounded by so much love leaves one with unrealistic expectations." Alice took their plates to the sink, and Daldry cleared the glasses. He stopped in front of her work table and contemplated the rows of little vials and bottles, the small earthenware pots full of thin strips of paper. "The absolutes are on the right. They're derived from concretes or resinoids. In the middle are the accords I'm working on right now." You're a chemist, like your father? No, I'm what they call a nose. I try to create new compositions, new fragrances. Absolutes are essential oils, and concretes are obtained by extracting perfume from natural vegetal sources like rose, jasmine, or lilac blossom. That table is known as an organ. Perfume makers and musicians share a lot of vocabulary. We talk in terms of notes and their accords, which are comparable to musical chords. I'm sorry, this is all terribly boring. Not at all. It sounds like an interesting trade. Have you already invented perfumes? I mean, perfumes that I could buy in a shop? Maybe something I know? Yes, I manage to sell them sometimes, said Alice with amusement. Most of my fragrances are relatively unknown for now, but you can find them in a few shops in London. It must be wonderful to see your work on the shelf. Just think, a man might have charmed a woman thanks to the cologne he was wearing. One you created. Alice laughed. I'm sorry to crush your fantasy, but I've only ever created perfumes for women. But I might make a men's cologne. It's an idea. Maybe I'll try for a peppery note, something woodsy and masculine, cedar or vetiver. I'll think about it. She cut 2 slices of fruitcake. Let's have dessert, and then I'll let you go. I've had a wonderful evening, but I'm afraid I'm exhausted. So am I, said Daldry with a yawn. I'm completely drained from concentrating on the road in the dark. You know, it snowed quite a bit while you were sleeping. Well, thanks for staying awake and keeping us on the road. I'm the one who should be thanking you. I haven't eaten fruitcake in years. And thank you for taking me to Brighton. It was very kind of you. Daldry looked up longingly at the skylight. It must be so bright in here during the day. It is. I'll invite you for tea sometime, so you can see for yourself. With his fruitcake finished, Daldry stood. Alice walked him to the door. I'm glad I don't have too far to go, he said from the hallway. True, you don't. Merry Christmas, Alice. Merry Christmas, Daldry. 3. Monday, December the 25th, 1950. Alice sat up in bed, but couldn't see outside. Snow had blanketed the city in the night, and a fine layer of it had covered the skylight, dimming the room. She stood on the bed and lifted the pane. As the snow fell away, a draught of icy air rushed in, making her close it as quickly as she could. With her eyes still fogged with sleep, she teetered over to the gas ring and put the kettle on. Daldry had